Welcome into this week's episode of the High School OT Press Box. We're at the end of August, transitioning into the fourth week of the fall sports season and the third week of high school football season. I bring in Joel Bryant and J. Mike Blake here. Joel, let's start with the first 2 weeks of the high school football season. We thought there were going to be a lot of things, that were expected this year, and it's kind of diverted over the first 2 weeks. There have been a lot of surprises, one of which, though, the top five teams in the state of North Carolina, again, High School OT's top 25 rankings are out for this upcoming week, the statewide rankings. Those top 4, 5, 6 teams, that top tier, is really, really elite through the first couple of weeks of the season.
Yeah, it starts at number one. We'll talk about it more, but Grimsley is feeling like a very unbeatable team right now. We'll get into that later, but yeah, the whole top five, top six is very dominant. What Providence Day did to Rollsville on Friday, very impressive. Huff shutting out Independence 35-0. I think most people would probably had Independence scoring one or two touchdowns in that game, and then West Charlotte continues to look good. And Cardinal Gibbons, quietly they've been the best team in the East. They're very talented and very well coached. And then the new kind of factor into the equation is Myers Park. And we'll get into it more, but Myers Park is kind of having the kind of impact that we thought they would have last year, but it's kind of coming to fruition this year.
Yeah, let's start though with Grimsley. We talked a little bit about it on Friday night in the High School OT post-game show, but in case you had not heard, the rumor circulating on Friday was that Faison Brandon was going to be out. Joel was there at the game as Grimsley defeated West Forsyth. Faison Brandon, the top recruit in the country, did not play in that game. Freshman Brody Lowe did, and threw for over 300 yards and led his team to a top 15 victory. And then this weekend, we were kind of talking a little bit more about the context of what Brody Lowe did and how he answered the bell so well. He's one of the top freshman quarterbacks in the state. And after seeing his performance on Friday, Joel, do you feel like you could almost plug Brody Lowe into a lot of offenses across the state, and he's one of the best quarterbacks out there?
Well, look, I mean, it was one game. West Forsyth didn't have the opportunity to really watch him on film really and see how they're going to call the offense for him, if they're going to call it any differently than they do with Faison Brandon. We had seen him in 7-on-7s, we've seen him in a scrimmage, but a different ball game on Friday Night Lights. And look, he played as well as he could have played for a freshman in that spot. It was a top 11 matchup in the state, and he was pretty efficient. He did not panic when he was under pressure. He would step up in the pocket and make a throw. It was very cool, calm, and collected, and the arm talent is very impressive. Some of the throws, some of the ball placement was very next level, I would say, especially some of the stuff down the sidelines to Caden Cato. Really good ball placement, really good touch on it. His arm talent is it's definitely up there with the quarterbacks in the state. And I was talking to some coaches, and if he plays like he did on Friday night, he continues to play like that. They have East Forsyth this week. I'm not sure how many teams in the state he would not start on. I don't think it's a very long list. He's obviously on one teams that he wouldn't start on, but there's probably maybe 10 other teams where he might not start. If he plays like that again, he has to play like that to continue doing that. But yeah, very good start for Brody Lowe.
You mentioned Myers Park. You were really high last year on Myers Park, and their performance last year was not up to their standard, as Coach Chris James even mentioned on Friday night when he joined us in the postgame show. But now they're starting to hit their stride, and we're starting to see that potential that, Joel, you first identified a year ago. And, even coming into this year, you had the way too early rankings that came out in early January. You were still really high on Myers Park. And one of the points that I think is incredible about what they've done the first 2 weeks of the season, that being a huge win over J.M. Robinson in week 1, and then a massive victory on the road at Weddington in week 2, where they just really handled the Warriors, who are a really good team. They're doing it without Rodney Dunham, who's arguably their best player and obviously top recruit. What is it about Myers Park, Joel, that, in your opinion, has allowed them to get off to such a strong start? And is this sustainable?
I mean, I think it is. I mean, top end talent wise, they're up there with the best teams in the state. When Dunham does come back, not many teams have a 5-star defensive end, so he would be that player. But But it's interesting you say that the fact that he hasn't been playing. Last year their whole excuse for like why they won 4 games was our quarterback got hurt, and to me I was like that shouldn't even matter because you have all these college players on your defense. You have a college power four wide receiver. You have two guys in the secondary who are going to be college players. So I didn't think it even needed to matter that the quarterback was hurt last year. They still should have made the playoffs. But this year, you can tell they've been extra focused during the offseason. And it's an interesting factor into this 8A West equation because it's obviously Huff and West Charlotte. And I was thinking it'd be West Forsyth and maybe Reagan as kind of like that tertiary option in the 8A West. But so far, those two teams aren't playing as well as I thought they would play. And Myers Park all of a sudden is this team that is, I think, West Charlotte and Huff would have a problem with coming into the playoffs. They would still be favored in that game probably. But it's definitely interesting that they're finally seeming to reach their potential this year.
J. Mike, you saw Providence Day, who is now up to number 4 in high school OT statewide rankings. Myers Park, as Joel had mentioned, now up to 6. When you look at Providence Day, what makes them so elite? I mean, they have so many different weapons that they can use, but you had the game on Friday night against Rolesville where it was just a complete blowout win. But, Gordon Sellers wasn't the one going for hundreds of yards. Obviously, Zaid Lott, the Syracuse commit quarterback, had a huge game, 4 touchdowns. But like Leo Delaney got hurt in that game, and those are 2 Clemson commits between he and Sellers. What is it about Providence Day that just makes them go and makes them so special? Because they're in that top tier that I mentioned of teams that are just really, really elite through the first 2 weeks of the season.
Well, I know Coach Chad Greer, when I talked to him after the game, was happy, one, to find out they had a lot more depth, especially on the line. They entered that game down 2 offensive linemen. Now they're down 3. And there were guys who I didn't even have on the roster coming in there and holding up their blocks against a really good defensive line. That's one side of it. They have a lot of depth, and they're finding out just how good these younger guys are. And the other part is on defense. It's not like they, rush the court. Were at the quarterback's face every single play. They did have a good rush. They had good coverage. But really, what it comes down to is I think they probably missed 1 tackle all game. I mean, they were just so sound defensively. It's one thing to say, hey, we're going to keep Rolesville in front of us, keep everything in front, and make our tackles. A lot of teams try that, and then a Rolesville receiver breaks 3 tackles and goes down the sideline for 6. It did not happen in this game because they just were playing super sound football defensively. And yes, Gordon Sellers was out there. He was almost a decoy. They went to other people so much and spread it around and could just pick up their yards. And another thing with Providence Day is I don't think there's too many teams that can beat them in the special teams game. They have one of the most electric returners in Steele Fletcher. They have one of the best kickers, punters, kickoff specialists in Jacob Baggett. So the field position game was all Providence Day in this one. That helps you win big games. That can help you blow out good teams if you just dominate the field position game. I've seen it over the years, and that's going to bode well for them because it's a tough sledding. That's the first time I've really seen an independent school 11-man football team that wasn't Harrell's Christian of years ago. And I was impressed. And I know that there are other schools out there that are even bigger in the line than Rolesville, like Rayboone Gap. So Providence Day is going to have to, they certainly have the coaching, the fundamentals, and the talent to take down a team like that. The size probably being the one thing they don't have as much of. But again, I think just when you get down to it, it's the little things that add up for a team like Providence Day. Yes, they got some headliners, but like they didn't really need the headliners. Zaid Lott was awesome, but they just kind of beat you with their cast of characters and good old school football.
Joel, on Friday night, J. Mike and I were talking about this on the postgame show towards the end of the show. Rolesville did a really good job this season constructing its 3 non-conference games and challenging the team at the level that they have talent-wise. Rolesville being one of the more talented teams in the state. But J. Mike and I kind of discussed, now that they're 0-2, nothing in the non-conference is going to burn you long-term. But is Friday night against Richmond almost a must-win game for Rolesville because they're putting themselves behind the ball so much early on that when RPI and conference seeding doesn't matter. So, no matter what Rolesville does the rest of the way, if they have 2-3 losses to their name before they even get into league play, who knows what that even means? Does it even matter what the result of that Millbrook game ends up being when they play them in a few weeks? Uh, is this a must-win for Rollsville next Friday night? And where do you think they kind of stand right now? You have them at 23 in the statewide rankings this week. Are they behind the ball already?
I'm not too focused on their RPI right now. Obviously, they're going to pick up wins in conference play. Their conference is very good outside of Millbrook and Leesville Road. I would say the biggest worry for me is just kind of like the team cohesion. This is a team that since turned to this decade, they haven't really lost games consecutively. Now they've lost 3 straight games going back to last state championship. I don't know how they're going to respond to that, frankly. They haven't faced this kind of adversity lately. They're usually just been blowing out teams and just kind of like running away with games. So it's going to be interesting to see how they respond cohesively. I think the wins will come, but this is one of the teams where there's so many kind of different pieces of talent. There's different personalities on it. You have to wonder, like, how do they stick together during this moment? And we'll find out pretty quickly against Richmond.
Yeah, a week 1 loss to Mallard Creek, a week 2 loss to Providence Day. Those are not 2 bad losses in any respect. Those are 2 of the top 10 teams in the state of North Carolina. So, I don't think you can really dock them too much for who they've played. But yeah, big game upcoming on Friday night for Rollsville against Richmond. I mentioned Mallard Creek, though. Mallard Creek goes and plays Warwick out of Virginia on Saturday afternoon. They escape with a 3-0 win, but it continued a trend where high school football teams from North Carolina, especially some of the top-end teams from North Carolina, have found a lot of success in the first 2 weeks of the season playing out-of-state opponents. And there's a lot of noise consistently about whether there's the gap. There's a gap between North Carolina and South Carolina, North Carolina and Virginia. People mention Georgia, people mention Tennessee, but North Carolina is going toe-to-toe with all of these states and coming out victorious more often than not. Joel, what do you think the recipe is to that? Like, is this just North Carolina making a statement? Has it always been this way? Like, what is your take on these early results and maybe this noise that surrounds, like, oh man, North Carolina facing a team from South Carolina, facing a team from Virginia?
Well, I think North Carolina has always been better, especially now. Just looking at the recruiting rankings every year, South Carolina and Virginia never had the top end talent that North Carolina has. That's just what it is. And I feel like there's people from within this state that hype up the other states for reasons I don't even understand. It's other media members that hype up these other states, these teams from other states. Never quite understood it. So I do pay attention to how the North Carolina teams do against the other states. Last week it was South Carolina that got a pretty good whooping from North Carolina this year. This week it was Virginia. I've always thought that North Carolina is more talented, and then I think that the football in the state's getting better and better, and I think they'll probably continue to be that way.
Do you agree, J-Mike, with what you've seen over these results?
Yeah, I like to kind of echo Joel's point in that there are, for whatever reason, a tendency in this state to say, oh man, these other states and these other powers, and not recognize that North Carolina is on the precipice of joining those schools. I mean, or those states. If you think about the talent-rich states for football, obviously you go the big ones, Texas and California and Florida, and then Georgia, and then per capita, usually South Carolina's in there or like an Alabama, and then there's North Carolina's kind of ascended past that Western New York or Pennsylvania, Ohio areas. Just look at the recruiting rankings. It's interesting for me to see because over time, and I think part of this is people struggle to adjust to the lay of the land now. I mean, my gosh, like I remember when I was at the N&O and Kerry would play Garner in non-conference, and people would say like, "Oh man, it's an old rivalry there." And I'm thinking they haven't been in the same conference for like 20 years. They're not rivals. Like it's not an old rivalry if you're never playing each other. People have trouble adjusting, and I think people have trouble adjusting now because we know South Carolina had, for the longest time, the most football NFL players per capita. And that the Tidewater area of Virginia, that was really good in the early 2000s. Therefore, it must always be just better than us. No, look around. Like North Carolina is a growing state. The schools that we have are getting bigger and better. And there's so many more football opportunities. One thing that really helped take North Carolina to another level is when Wake Forest went on its three-peat to break the drought of Wake County. All of a sudden, now you look across the state, and there's not really a weak spot. There's a lot of good players in every region. If people wanted to say the Triangle was weak, they can't say that anymore. Charlotte's strong. The Triangle's strong. Eastern North Carolina has its players. Western North Carolina has its standouts. Like it's all over. Everything is the rising tide has lifted all boats, and I think people need to realize, like, if North Carolina had this kind of high school football talent and these kind of teams back in the 90s, we're probably talking about the UNC and NC State football programs in a much different light, because the football talent in the state was not as deep back then. And that's why when Chuck Amato came to NC State in the early 2000s, he went to Florida and mined Florida to get NC State up to where it could be nationally respected. But now you could actually stay in state and be nationally respected. The only problem is it happens at a time when NIL is now where every school can come into North Carolina and offer a great package to these players. I mean, Samari Matthews is awesome. It's just if Samari Matthews existed in the 90s, Texas is not on his radar. Texas has to worry about maintaining the pipelines in the states that Texas always recruits. But now Texas can say, oh, yeah, we'll take these best players from our backyard, and we'll go get guys in 7 different other states that we normally don't go to because we have something we can offer that's tangible. Mm-hmm. But again, like, it's interesting to think about what if North Carolina high school football was this good back in the 90s? I mean, it would have been a different world, different looking ACC perhaps. Yeah. But I think people do need to kind of look around, smell the roses, and enjoy what we've got. This is good. It's never been better, in my opinion.
I think there's good coaching in the state too. There's a lot's been made about the pay disparity between the state and other states, which definitely is a problem. But something that I always think about is, yeah, we always get these coaches that are leaving for these other states and getting head coaching jobs there. That's a testament, I think, to the coaching here, is that these states know that there's good coaches up here. They go try and hire them. So I think that's an important piece of that. There is good coaching here. Just look at some of these staffs, some of these teams in this top 5, top 6 that we were talking about earlier. There's some very, very good coaching. And it's full staffs, too, for these top teams. It's not just the head coach. There's very good staffs in the state right now.
Yeah, and it's starting to show again. North Carolina, very dominant over its counterparts from South Carolina and Virginia over the first 2 weeks of the high school football season. Joel, as we roll along here in the HighSchoolOT Press Box, what has stood out to you the most through the first 2 weeks of the season? Are there any trends that just really kind of rise above the rest when you look at the results from the first 2 weeks?
So 2 teams that graduated a very good quarterback, East Forsyth and Cleveland. Wasn't really sure what to think of them this year. It's not just quarterback; they had other players that are gone from last year's teams as well. And for the first 2 weeks, they've been pretty dominant. East Forsyth just had a really nice win over Northern Guilford, which beat Reidsville in week 1. And Cleveland is crushing teams. They scored 60 points on Pinecrest, which is a very good program in the 8A East. So it's interesting that no matter what, these programs, they can lose, outstanding, in Cleveland's case, a 4-year starter, and in East Forsyth's case, a guy that might end up playing at UNC this year. It's interesting that these kind of programs still, it's more than just one guy for these teams. And we always have to remember that. I have to remind myself that going into the season. And now, I mean, both those teams are now top 15 in our poll after not starting the season ranked. So shout out to those 2 teams for continuing the just the quality program that they are. And I think, in terms of teams that have been disappointing, Rollsville is definitely one of those teams. You think about it, they have 3 legit college wide receivers. You would expect that passing offense to be better than it has been. So that's something they're going to have to work out. There's some other teams, too, that have been kind of disappointing. But I think that's probably a discussion we could have midway through the season. Maybe there's going to be just some teams that are like figuring it out in week 3, week 4, week 5. So I'll lay that out probably midway through the season. Here are the teams that are most disappointing.
Yeah, as Joel mentioned, Cleveland, they're averaging over 50 points a game through the first 2 weeks of the season. And again, Corinth Holders and Pinecrest, while not state championship contenders, very strong programs across the state of North Carolina. So, yeah, good on Cleveland, just being able to pick up right there. And also, you mentioned the quarterback play replacing Jackson Bird. They also had some top receivers either graduate or transfer out, so they've done a really good job there as well.
They had 2,000-yard receivers just leave. One's at Millbrook and one's at Clayton. And it's just the passing game is just amazing again. It makes no sense.
J. Mike, what has stood out to you when you start looking at some of the results and some of the teams that are starting to rise above the rest just through the early part of the season?
Well, I think like this is interesting that I mean Joe and I have talked about this through week. We came into an 8 classification world thinking, oh,
Yeah.
this is going to be almost too easy for us to pick who's going to be in these championship games because in the past, I mean, the playoffs were very tough towards the latter rounds. You had a few upsets or close games, and now you kind of break everyone apart, and the haves and have-nots would have a greater divide. That's what we were thinking, but the unpredictability of it is actually really
Yeah.
interesting to me. Like right now, like Roseville sits 0-2. We're sitting here talking about like, well, Roseville, like, can they get it back together? Whereas beginning of the year, you're just thinking, oh, they're a shoe in for 8A East final. And
Yeah.
now you're thinking like, well, what about Hogger? What about these other teams?
Yeah.
Um,
Then, and to your point, the 7A West. I mean, we were thinking we're heading for a Grimsley Weddington collision again.
yeah,
Then your 2 weeks, Weddington has lost. Kind of a they kind of got out hand against Myers Park a little bit, and then Grimsley all of a sudden is missing their best player. So now that's in question. So this is a good point by you because it's all like I'm not happy about injuries, but I'm happy that it's become less predictable than I was thinking it would be.
we have just as many storylines, if not more, which I think is like a best case scenario when you double the championships. Think about the 1A East. We were like, oh yeah, Wilson Preps got in the bag, and now 2 weeks in, you're like, well, this KIP team can like watch out for them.
It's in
So
Northside and
yeah, like there's a lot of I think, and that's a good thing for like you want the A class. We didn't. This is what we were fearing with A classes. It'd be great if our fears were kind of unfounded that we would have so many playoff blowouts in the latter rounds, and we would know by week 3 like who's going to be in the championship game. And maybe that's true for other sports, but right now for football, it seems like a lot of stuff's up in the air, and there's a lot of good playoff battles to look forward to because we're like, wow, like 8A West, okay, like we'll see who emerges out of Charlotte and Myers Park. Where at the beginning of the season, you're thinking like, oh, it's going to be a 2-man race. Well, no, it might be 3, it might be 4. So
some of these classes are just way up in the air. The 6A, I mean, there's no clear favorite in 6A right now. There's no clear favorite in 3A, and it's for a different reason because 3A is very talented. We don't know who's going to come out that. 4A, I have no idea. I mean, Reedsville is not quite as good as we were thinking, possibly. Then there's a lot of good teams in the East right now, so it's very unpredictable right now.
Well, we always thought 71st, despite replacing two of their best players they've had in the last couple of decades, we're thinking like, yeah, but 6A East, who else is there besides 71st? And they lose in week 1, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, it's more wide open than I thought it would be there as well.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing, I think, positive for the first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
We're starting to talk about like one of the interesting things about classifications is going to be, I think earlier on, once we get to week 4, week 5, we're really going to be able to hone in on, okay, these are the contenders. We're not going to be coming down to week 9, 10, 11 and still up in the air of like, could this team be one of the teams that goes far? I think it'll start hashing itself out again. We're only 2 weeks into the season here. But, another thing that's on the horizon here at High School OT are playoff projections and being able to figure out where these teams stand, what they look like in these new brackets that are coming together for all of these classifications. Obviously, 8A is going to be just wildly unique to the other ones. There's a lot of questions about what is a 1A bracket going to look like, things like that. J. Mike, over the next couple of days, you've been kind of diving into like where do East-West lines fall, and I think that's something that maybe today's, kind of this current 3-4 year block of high school sports fans may not be familiar with, like this whole East-West line and what it used to be. Obviously, if you followed high school sports for a while, or if you're in it 6, 7, 8 years ago, you understand like how different programs are in flux because of that line. But as East-West lines and longitudes and all of that get sorted through, as playoff projections start to come out, what's kind of a primer for people of like, how is this going to work? And why is my favorite team that may have been in the West last year, may have been in the East last year, why are they potentially flipping regions this fall?
Yeah, so this is a great topic because even if you follow high school sports nonstop for 5 years, we might change it on a dime and go back to something that was used 10 years ago. And all of a sudden you're in the dark, but someone who maybe hasn't followed high school sports in the last 5 years is like, oh, yeah, this is how they always used to do it. So let's kind of break down how we did it last year, and the last 4 years for that matter. Last 4 years were good in that you knew going into the season whether you were going to be in the East or the West in any sport. You knew going into the season who you had to beat to make it to a championship game. Now, in the past, what used to happen and what will happen once again this year is you're going to see who makes the playoffs first and then split it East from West. So what that means is there are some schools. Now, some schools are going to be East no matter what, and some schools are going to be West no matter what. But there's going to be probably in each bracket about 10 or so schools that do not know going into the season if they're going to be East or West. They're going to figure it out because depending on who else makes the playoffs. So, for instance, like 8A, I was kind of looking at a little bit of this today. In 8A, there are 24 playoff teams. So the 12 easternmost, you're always going to be East. So that stops with Apex. The 8 that are the westernmost are always going to be in the West. That stops with West Forsyth. All those teams in the middle, and that's teams from like Pinecrest and Jordan and Apex Friendship and Green Level and Green Hope, what they are having to wait for is to see who doesn't make the playoffs. And that moves the line a little bit. And you can find yourself in the West in one sport and in the East in the other sport with two playoffs that are going on at the same time. So take Jordan. Imagine Jordan boys soccer. First round game is at Providence. You're playing in Charlotte. But Jordan volleyball could be in the East playing at Rolesville or something like that. And that's people are going to say, wait, I thought we were East, or wait, I thought we were West. But really, it changes based on the sport and based on who else makes it. You figure out the field first, and then you divide. And like for instance, as I was looking through soccer, and it kind of hit me a little bit. The soccer in 4A, or actually everything in 4A, they have so many Western kind of teams that East-West line is going to be a lot different than it was in the past. So Southwestern Randolph, it's a top 10 boys soccer team this year. They were the West champion last year. This year, they could be playing a championship rematch against Clinton in like the third round in the East because Southwestern Randolph is really likely to go East in most sports. It's not 100% given, but they're really close to it. So again, that like other sports, like individual sports, you still know where you're going to be because you have to do those regional qualifiers a certain way and have an equal number of individuals qualifying. But in the team brackets, the team sports, you figure out who made it and then you go from there. So 1A could really fluctuate a lot because there would be a lot of 1A schools that don't even play that sport. So you can rule them out. And all of a sudden the East-West line creeps a little bit more further from what you would call East or what you would call West. This is why in the past you may have seen like a first round game where a school from Robeson County, which is where Lumberton is, driving to the mountains for a first round football game. Hobton, which is east of 95, has a big thing in their end zone hailing the West regional champions. And that's because there are just so few teams to the West and so many other football teams to the East. Hobton went West that year and made it to the Final Four. So it's going to take a little bit of reprogramming. I remember Granville Central and Roxborough Community were schools in the past that RIP Granville Central, but they were schools in the past where they would go East in one sport and West in the other in the same season, in the same fall season or in the same spring season. So some of these schools are going to figure out, hey, we're now in that position. We don't know East or West until the brackets come out or until we see the playoff projections on HighSchoolOT.
Yeah. So,
continue on.
It's funny, J-Mike was talking about this. And so the way that the playoff projections are going to work at first, in football at least, is I have my classification power rankings. We don't have RPIs yet. So I'm just going to plug those into my spreadsheet here with my longitudes, and we're going to see how it goes. I already have done 8A. So it's funny that J-Mike was talking about Pinecrest and Jordan, because Pinecrest right now, and the way I'm doing it, Pinecrest right now is in the West, and Jordan right now is in the East. And so that's just something, it's not going to be definitive because it's just my opinion right now. But yeah, as J-Mike's kind of hit it on the head, where that's the kind of thing we're looking at. And then one thing about it is, say Pinecrest goes east for some reason. It's not just Pinecrest that gets changed by that. Every single matchup is like a cascade change after that. So that's the interesting thing about the whole East-West line is the matchups for everybody. Every single team could be completely different. Going from last Friday night of the season into the Saturday morning RPIs, everything could change. So it's gonna be very exciting. It's gonna be some kind of stuff at the buzzer that's gonna be exciting to figure out.
Another thing here, as you go through and you look at these East-West lines and you look at where they all fall, typically a good rule of thumb, though, is you look in the middle part of the state. As J. Mike said, Green Hopes, Green Levels, Panther Creeks, Jordans, Pinecrest, Richmond, Southwestern Randolph. You kind of go from that Randolph County corridor all the way to that like Wake, Johnston, and then you go straight down. Typically, those are the teams that are going to be caught in that net that are either on that east-west or are in flux for that east-west line. Obviously, I think one of the most notable state championship situations that we've seen because of the east-west line was a few years back when Green Hope and Panther Creek played each other for a state championship in volleyball, and they are rivals divided by Highway 55 right across the street, essentially, from one another. Obviously, they have their own rivalry, their battle for Highway 55, and they got to have that in a state championship game. Like, that never happens. But this is one of those situations, and as we look across all the sports, like, J. Mike, you and I have already begun to talk about this, like, two of the best 8A volleyball teams in the state are Green Hope and Green Level, and they're on this line, and they are right next to each other in the same conference. Does the East-West line split between them? There's a very good chance it could, and Green Hope could be in this situation again with its volleyball program.
Yeah, and by the way, a few other examples. That one always stands out as like the most recent example, but I think it was 2008 where, and then I don't think we'll ever see this happen again, but it was the old, it was I think the Mid-South. It was one of those. It was Mid-South or Two Rivers. I think it was the Mid-South or the Southeastern Conference where used to have the Pinecrest, Richmond, Scotland, Douglas Birch, 71st, Jack Britt. Back when all of those teams were really, really good. So the East-West line split that conference in half in both the 4AA and the 4A championships back when we used to do subdividing. And so the 4AA championship was Jack Britt versus Richmond. And the 4A championship was 71st versus Douglas Bird. 71st and Douglas Bird are also like 5 miles apart as well, like if that. So the top four teams from the same conference were all in the championship games facing each other as East and West, when really they're just all in the same Sand Hills area. That will probably never happen again. But talking about a power conference where the 4 state finalists are the top 4 teams in your league. It is, and it's also, as Joel said, the cascade effect. Pay attention to which power teams are caught in the middle, like a Dudley in 6A. Like that changes the complexion in a lot of sports if Dudley's in the East versus Dudley in the West.
Reidsville and 4A for football.
Reidsville and 4A. And 4A is weird because 4A is probably the most Western driven. So like you could like go ahead and get used to some teams being in the East that you don't normally associate with being the East. But it is, you get like a state championship contender like Southwestern Randolph boys soccer, and all of a sudden the West gets a lot easier and the East gets a lot tougher, or vice versa.
Yeah. I think generally speaking, football fans are going to be more used to what we're going to see because of the sub-classifications that we had for 20 years during the start of the century. But I do think that the East-West line that volleyball and soccer fans were kind of used to back in the 2010s, it's going to be a lot different. Like J. Mike said, the 4A is pretty West heavy, 5A is pretty West heavy, versus when it was just 4 classifications, the line didn't move as much because there's more pulling on it from each side, if that makes sense. But now when there's less teams, one little change, one team in can really have a big impact on just where that line is falling. So for the sport fans of the other sports, really pay attention to our playoff projections this year. It's going to be very exciting for you to see just how everything's going to shake out.
So you're telling me we could get East Duplin Reidsville, which was a state championship a few years ago, in the East playoffs?
Yeah.
That could be. Yeah, that could be very, very exciting as you kind of divide things up. But you also look at, you look at a program like Reidsville football. could their path through the East be a little bit easier than maybe it would be through the West? Like, can they still find a route to a state championship game, which is something that, some of these programs that may have had a hard time cracking through in one region or the other might have better luck going over to the other side. And, we mentioned volleyball, like the 8A West in volleyball is like wide open, whereas in the East, it's like you got to get through Green Hope or Green Level. But if one of those teams goes one way or the other, then all of a sudden, like, they are the preeminent favorite to win that region, opposed to maybe a West Forsyth or a Huff or an Ardrey Kell.
Yeah, so with the Reedsville point, again, I mean, this goes back to the football conversation we were having earlier. Going into the season, I was thinking, like, yeah, they'd probably rather go to the eastern half of the state. But over the first 2 weeks, I mean, you look at West Craven, you look at East Duplin and Eastern Wayne, these are legitimate threats to Reedsville in the East. And I have all three of those teams in the top 6 right now in 4A. So it's not going to be easy if they come east. It's not going to be easy west either, but it's not going to be maybe in the past where they were in the 2AA East and ended up being a cakewalk because teams weren't very good that year. I don't think that's going to be the case this year for them.
J. Mike, we touched a little bit on playoffs for soccer and volleyball, but through the first now 3 weeks of the season, 2 weeks of football, 3 weeks of the rest of the fall sports, what has stood out to you in terms of who are some top teams? Obviously, Marvin Ridge was your preseason number 1 in soccer, and they've lived up to the hype.
Yeah, I just want to say, first of all, boys soccer rankings are probably the hardest sport to rank.
Oh my gosh! Yes.
I've had experience ranking so many sports for so many years, and nothing's
so
harder
hard.
than that. Like, it's because of the trends that have only picked up in this decade with club teams and academies. You may have a state player of the year as a junior who is not committed anywhere, not play his senior year, and still not be committed anywhere. But he, for some reason, there's a pressure to, I need to focus on club, or, maybe this is my chance to get the D2, D3 scholarship. You just never really know. And now there's MLS Next academies. So a lot of those players, and there's more of those now than there were last year. So now people from the Triangle are playing MLS Next. People in the Triad are playing that as well. And so all of a sudden you just kind of don't know. Nonetheless, the kind of big 4 or 5 teams that we've got at the top of the rankings that's entering last week are pretty much teams that we kind of counted on being good this year. Marvin Ridge, I mean, I don't have this week's rankings out yet. You can see those in HighSchoolOT very shortly. But Marvin Ridge, Myers Park, South Meck, that was my preseason 1, 2, 3. Ardrey Kell was my preseason 5. They beat South Meck. So that's your new 1, 2, 3 is Marvin Ridge, Myers Park, Ardrey Kell. It's a very Charlotte led area this year, despite the MLS Next academies and things like that. There's just a lot of
Not
talent.
to mention what Charlotte Catholic has done. They lost some guys from last year, but did not miss a stride whatsoever.
Yeah, I kind of overestimated like the numbers they lost, but they brought back like a lot. Their top 1 or 2 scorers, and they haven't missed a beat. And there's some teams that we're kind of figuring out the East. I think the East is more of a lot of teams that, hey, they were on the cusp last year, and they brought back a lot of people. So I was a little bit high on New Hanover, Middle Creek. I had both those teams ranked in the top 20. And right now they're both in the top 10 because they have proven that, yes, they brought everyone back. They were just a year away from being really dominant. And it's also cool to see. It's so much easier to rank the teams at the lower levels and not in I say lower levels. I just mean smaller classifications, not lower levels, because there's nothing lower level about Southwestern Randolph, Western Alamance, Clinton. These teams are more rural, but they're still really, really good. And you just know that they're all going to come back the next year. You're not randomly losing somebody. I think the Triangle in the eastern half of the state is a little bit more up in the air. Whereas the West, we've kind of first couple of weeks, there's a lot of good teams. It's not an automatic that it's Myers Park and Marvin Ridge representing the 8A and 7A respectively. But there's a lot of really good teams out there, and they've kind of already made their kind of announced themselves. It's interesting. Last year, after the first week of the season, or the first 2 weeks, I should say, you have the North Carolina Soccer Coaches Associated kickoff. Our top 25 changed 8 teams in, 8 teams out. This year, we did the exact same thing. And really, if you look back to last year, that was the week where a lot of those teams kind of settled in. They were, after that week is over, it's even if a team fell out one week, they could be back in, and you just kind of figure it out the rest of the way. And this week it's already happened. Same thing happened. We had 8 teams in, 8 teams out, and it like, okay, these are the contenders, or these are the teams that will be looking at the rest of the way. It does. It's hard to imagine you. Now, there's plenty of soccer teams that figure it out as they go along. Marvin Ridge last year had some injuries, and they won their last 16 in a row to reach the state championship game. But it really is interesting how this is the make or break week for these teams.
So far through the first couple of weeks of the season, High School OT has already seen a dozen of the teams that were recently in the top 25 of the boys soccer rankings. The same can be said for volleyball, with just over a dozen teams that we've seen so far. That's always our goal. Like, you got to see the top teams. You got to see, those top 20 to 25, 45 teams. And then as things begin to sort themselves out throughout September and October, that's where you really start to hone in on who are the championship contenders, who are the conference contenders, and then really starting to see that. I know that's a question we always get a lot, is like, it'll be like August 20th, and it's like, oh, really? Like, you have not come out and seen us? And it's like, it takes a while to get across the whole state and see everybody. Yeah. So I'm like sometimes you just got to get the ones that, you can scoop up quickly, that are going to be those upper echelon teams. And then you really just have to, like, slowly, methodically work your way across each region of the state, making sure you see everybody. And it always helps when teams schedule really well and they play other good teams, so you can, knock out multiple birds with one stone. But, shifting over to volleyball, we had our volleyball showcase, not this past Saturday, but the Saturday prior. Green Level really mashed its foot down on the gas and established itself as the number one team in North Carolina. They swept away Cardinal Gibbons. They swept away J.H. Rose. In our showcase, they swept away Orange. And, Orange ended up going 5 this past week with J.H. Rose. Rose has bent for the last week, but has not broken. They've won 3 5-set matches over top teams: Orange, Chapel Hill. That was in our showcase, the Chapel Hill one. And then Aiden Grifton. I know they have Aiden Grifton again this upcoming week. But Green Level is really starting to pull away, and it's one of those programs, kind of as we mentioned in soccer, like, they lost a prominent player last year in Talia Frankum, who's now at NC State, but they had a handful of Division I girls back. They had a handful of really good freshmen last year who are back. And then they get, like Hannah Pantiga, for example, who's a Division I commit who did not play last year but was at Green Level and played 2 years ago. She's back with them, and it just feels like the Gators are just kind of on this course now where, if they just keep playing the way that they're playing, they're going to almost ride out as the top team in the state all the way up until the playoffs. One interesting thing, though, J Mike, before we get to you, this upcoming weekend, I'm really excited to get out to Green Level on Saturday, because Green Level's hosting themselves, Cardinal Gibbons, Ardrey Kell, and number 3 Marvin Ridge. That's the 1, 2, 3 teams in the entire state. So a lot of that's gonna work itself out this weekend when they all play each other.
Yeah, what a great event. And I love that both soccer and volleyball had these events, like the High School OT volleyball showcase last weekend, or the previous weekend, where we get to see early on, like, how these teams stack up against each other. And it's like you said, like, Green Level, like, geez, okay, who can beat them? We'll find out after this weekend. I mean, do not discount Green Hope in that conference. Anything can happen in that rivalry, but it is cool to see, like, how these teams they come into the season with high hopes, and then they back it up the way that they have.
Yeah, Green Level had never beaten Green Hope 3 times in a year before last year. The first 2 matches were in the regular season. They were both 5-set matches, and then that third meeting, I was like, oh, like, this can go either way. They've gone 5 of the first 2 times. Green Level snuck away with both of them, and then Green Level just punches them in the mouth. 3-0 sweep, done. And I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty impressive. And it feels like, besides one little hiccup against D.H. Conley last year late in the playoffs, like, the Gators have just been on this run where they've been unstoppable. But again, it should be really exciting this weekend to see how they match up. Again, Green Level and Cardinal Gibbons are playing against Marvin Ridge and Ardrey Kell. If you remember last year, Marvin Ridge and Gibbons had an epic 4A state championship match where, it was a 4-set win for Cardinal Gibbons. But at the end of that, both sides were like, massive respect to the other side for how they perform. So that'll be really interesting to see, because Cardinal Gibbons is still in a little bit of just finding their identity this year because they graduated Alina Ryan, their libero, to UCLA. We saw them kind of get their feet back under them in the high school OT showcase when they defeated DH Conley. They got beat pretty bad in that opening set, but then they really rallied together and kind of figured things out now that they have Genevieve Harris back. Her debut this season, her senior year, came last Saturday again, that DH Conley matchup. She obviously played with Team USA over the entirety of the summer, played with two different teams for Team USA over the summer. So she's back. She's the reigning state championship most valuable player, reigning Gatorade State Player of the Year. Cardinal Gibbons did not play this past week, but they open up starting this week with Seaforth at Seaforth, and then they have Marvin Ridge and Ardrey. So that'll be very interesting to see how all of that kind of mixes up and goes out, because Marvin Ridge is another team that they graduated a lot from last year, but they had so many girls that were in that mix. Like, they had so much depth last year that most of these girls who maybe weren't key contributors last year have just slid up the depth chart one now that they've had some graduation. And the Mavericks have been really, really, really tough. They're 9-0 this year. They've only dropped 2 sets all season. One was to Dorman from South Carolina. The other was to New Life Camp, a homeschool program in North Raleigh. So that should be really interesting, dear Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. And
as
New
we
Life,
keep things moving. Oh.
Sorry, I was going to say New Life Camp homeschool team that, like, we need to figure out what's going on with this team at some point. They're really good. You usually don't get a homeschool team that's top 25 good, but they are.
Yeah, New Life kind of broke onto the scene last year and just had like this run where at first you're like, this is just a homeschool volleyball program playing really well to start the year. They're playing other homeschool programs, like, okay, that's a nice record. And then the wins start stacking, and then they start playing, teams who are in the NCISA, and they start beating those teams. And you're like, okay, like, this team might be for real. And they got into our top 25 last year, and they kept climbing and climbing and climbing in our top 15 rankings for the 919 area code. And then you look at them this year and you look at who they've scheduled. You look at the fact that in a 3-set match with Marvin Ridge, they took one of those sets from the Mavericks. They swept away NRCA, who won the state championship last year. They swept away Panther Creek, who is an NCHSA 8A opponent. They've actually swept NRCA twice this year, sweeping away Wake Christian, another good NCISA program. They've just been dominant all year long. They've only dropped 3 sets this year. One was to Ravenscroft. The other 2 came in that Marvin Ridge match. But they've really beefed up with some top teams from around the state and some top NCHSA teams, which shows like they're ready to really hang in there. And they have a really talented team. I mean, Maggie Ayers, who's a Division I commit for New Life Camp, she's been really good. Grayson Shepard, who we saw 2 years ago as a freshman libero that helped take Middle Creek to a 4A state championship win. You look across the board, and a couple of years ago there was the Carey Crowns homeschool that was so good at volleyball, and it feels like a lot of the key pieces from that program from a couple of years ago have now matriculated over to New Life Camp, and they're probably one of those top teams in the state. One other thing I'm going to bring up here, J. Mike, before we close out on this week's episode, in the vein of some things that I've seen during volleyball season, along with the trends that have been happening in soccer, and back to a conversation we had about football a few episodes back and transfers, and just how things are changing in the culture and the landscape is changing in high school sports. There have been a lot of top volleyball players that have not played this season, elected not to play. And in soccer, obviously you touched on it earlier about how there's options now like MLS Next where kids don't have to play in high school anymore. What are your thoughts on all of that and the value of that? Because, we're putting together like our preseason watch lists and all of that. And, we always try to put our best foot forward when we're building these watch lists and we're constructing these. And obviously we at least I feel we do a pretty good job of tracking where kids are and what they're doing and what these programs look like coming into each season. But no matter how much we try to make sure our bases are covered, it's not always the case that we're right. I mean, I've turned up to a couple of volleyball games this year where I've looked around and said, like, wait, where's this person? And then you like look at the roster and you're like, oh, they're just not playing this year. But it's not just a volleyball only thing. It's not a side. It's everything now. We're seeing it in basketball. We're seeing North Carolina have 3 or 4 top 100 recruits in the country, and none of them are playing at their home schools anymore. They're all out of state. We're seeing football with all this movement, and we're seeing soccer with all these kids not playing in high school. Now volleyball, like, whoa, is this a problem?
It's absolutely a problem. It's unfortunate that we've kind of gotten to this point, but I think there's a few things. Like, one, if people talk about like this generation of teenagers, they're like, oh, well, they don't really care as much about institutions. For whatever reason, they've chosen to not care about the institution of playing for your school rather than the institution of that club or travel team that is probably, in some cases, I would say, kind of trying to use you to advance what they want to do as a travel team. Not all travel teams, not all AU teams or anything like that. But there's a lot of people, especially with the transfer part of it, that are looking at those players as like, oh, this is a piece that I can add to get better as a team or help me out as a coach. I will say like that's part of it. And I think the other part of it is, schools really need to try to more. It's harder with a lot of growth in the area and a lot of growth in our state. Like, what makes school sports special, and really honing in on that and trying to create the most special culture school-wide that you have, because people should want that. They should want, like, this is where your legacy is. I know it's hard for top athletes to think about that because they're going to all these other places. But the legacy is getting into college. The legacy is what I do in my travel team. But really, no, the legacy where you'll always be remembered is what you did for your high school team. That's where the stories are built. Because college, you never know. There's so many high school greats that go on to college and they're just a role player, and then they transfer portal a few times around, and that's it. If they look at this like this, these are the moments I'm not going to get back. I'm not going to get anything like it replicated. Then they'll get the most out of it. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that until it's too late. Like those players who do transfer or choose not to play, they're like, man, I missed it. Oh, I should have done that. Or maybe they'll talk themselves into like, you know what, that probably was the best for my development. In actuality, it wasn't. Like, they would have developed at the same rate. So it's just about valuing what high school athletics gives you, what the scholastic and athletic environment gives you. And that's just a collective thing. I don't have the immediate answer, but I think that's the problem, is that a lot of students are thinking like, actually, it's kind of cool if I don't play for my school because it shows that I'm on another level, instead of saying like, this is where I can make my, like, this is 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I want to say I left a legacy here. I left, I have something I can look back on with a lot of pride.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that, the goal is obviously, with the way high school athletics are and college athletics are now, the goal is you go to college, you get this money, whether it's NIL, whether it's scholarship, a free education, all of that. The goal is to get to college now. People are putting so much money and so many resources into just getting the ability to play college athletics. And I think people are now overlooking the value of playing high school athletics more than they should. And one of the things I think is a lot of these kids who are making these decisions and making these moves, it's not really affecting their quote unquote recruiting process. There might be people here convincing them like, oh, well, if you do this, like, iron's going to sharpen iron and it's going to get you ready for this point. But truth of the matter is, you're going to go to college. If you're the elite of the absolute elite, you might play right away. But we even, like, you look at different sports across the state of North Carolina, those top recruits aren't immediately making an impact. There's not, for every Isaiah Evans who's starting for Duke as a true freshman, there's a star player who just rode the bench year one, or didn't even see the floor, or redshirted, or, had to work really hard to carve their way into the lineup. You look at Emma Clark, who softball state player of the year across all sports for the NCHSA, goes to Tennessee. They make a run to the Women's College World Series, and she grew into a role there where she was able to contribute, but she wasn't, as a true freshman, your everyday player there. So I think these kids who you look at those, they stayed true to their high school. They had the offers. It didn't affect them to stay there in high school. If you look at an Isaiah Evans, you look at a Paul McNeil, you look at an Emma Clark, you look at those who are at these upper echelon programs doing these really big things. But you also see these kids who transfer with the offers that they got at their original public high school, or in some cases just at their NCISA school. It's not There's not a lot of stories out there of kids who just like leave, go somewhere else, or just opt not to play high school athletics, and then their recruiting just takes off. Are there some? Yeah, there's a couple out there. But are there as many for the amount that are leaving and transferring? I don't think so.
Yeah, that's a big point, is that and it's interesting. So there's a few basketball players leaving the state, and I said these things come in cycles, but it's interesting that this cycle started so close to the last cycle where we had the big four: Juke Harris of Salisbury going to Wake Forest, Isaiah Evans of North Mech going to Duke, Drake Powell of Northwood going to UNC, and Paul McNeil of Richmond going to NC State. Those big four stayed and played their final high school games in front of packed crowds every night, including three of those four in Wake Forest, or at Wake Forest University and Lawrence Joel Coliseum. And I said, and someone else commented like, yeah, but those guys had their offers already, so they didn't need to transfer. I'm thinking, so does CJ Rosser, like, so does LJ Smith. They already have all the offers they're pretty much going to get. So how is this different? You're trying to say that, yeah, well, those guys had their offers. These guys have their offers too. Like, if you haven't offered CJ Rosser or LJ Smith yet, like, what are you waiting for? So
and it's not like they're. I mean, you have like obviously your Tars Bowie, your Marcus Kerr, who moved on from Chambers, or in a very metropolitan area. Jordan Page, who has stayed at Broughton. God bless him for doing that. I mean, thank you.
Yeah.
We finally have a top 10 player in the country who didn't leave, but he's in Raleigh. But you can't even make the excuse of like they can't find you.
No.
Like LJ Smith's at Lincolnton and CJ Rosser's at Northern Nash, and you have Kendra and Deontay over at Reedsville. Like, it doesn't matter where you are nowadays.
Yeah.
You're going to be seen, and these colleges are going to commit their resources to you because they know what you are. They don't need to see you play for some of these other schools and these other programs and travel to these other states necessarily to know that you're good.
Yeah, we have so many Division I, Division II, and Division III colleges in North Carolina. It's 2025. Everyone's got a camera. Like, you don't need exposure by going to another place. You need to, if you send your clips, or your coach makes content and says, hey, this is our guy, take a look, and then you go to I'm sure it's more about the recruiting camps that you go to. You go to those, like, you can be seen. Like, it's just that simple. But when we're talking about some of these other sports, like, for instance, soccer is interesting to me because the best United States men's national soccer team was that group with Tim Howard at goalie and Clint Dempsey and Landon Donovan. And I can't remember about Donovan, but I know Dempsey played for his high school in Texas, and I know Tim Howard played for his high school in New Jersey. And actually, Tim Howard did not play goalkeeper. He played, I think, on the back line or midfield, because that was going to get him better with his feet, because he didn't need to get any better as a goalie. So that was a way that he used high school experience to get better. Since then, we have said, hey, let's stop letting these guys play high school. Let's be like the rest of the world. And the United States men's national team results have only gotten worse over time with these guys. There is something to be said, and I'll say this is especially true of basketball. There's something to be said about what you have to learn as a player and as a teammate when you are the guy the other team is going after every single night. When you are just a bit player on a not a bit player, a role player, a second option, a third option on a loaded team, and you're steamrolling people, I don't think you're growing as much as a player. And they'll say, like, but you're growing in practice, right? You're going against some of the best players in the state and every day in practice. You're probably doing ones versus twos in practice. So you're probably actually not going against the best. That's number one. Other than your individual drills. But number two, like, the way that basketball development for years is you learn how to be the guy, and then you be a good teammate, make your teammates better, and then you get to that next level. Either you're still the guy, or now you're where your teammate was, and now you've kind of learned what that whoever your number one option is, you learn what he needs because now he's in the spot you used to be in, and that's real pressure. Paul McNeil, Isaiah Evans, Juke Harris, and Drake Powell had real pressure of every single team gunning for them every night. And if they didn't get 25 points and 10 rebounds and 4 or 5 assists and 3 steals, their team was not going to make it. But they had to bring it every single night. That's real development. That's development. That's going through the fire every night, is taking people's best shot and you not having 5D1 guys around you to make it work. You got to make it work regardless. And I think we've gotten away from that. Somehow told people, you know what you really need to do to be great? Go to Montverde Academy and play with 5 other lottery picks, and we'll bring one of you off the bench. Okay, they're like the idea that Cooper Flagg got better by going to Montverde. Cooper Flagg had every offer from the country living in Maine. Okay, like he had every offer he wanted in Maine. He didn't need Montverde. He went there, and I don't think it hurt his development, but I don't know if it's necessarily like made him the guy. But Cooper Flagg is the guy because he played in freaking Maine. All right. And he took whatever teammates he had and he made them winners. And everyone knew to key in on him every single night. That just made him tougher mentally. So it's interesting that like now we've kind of stressed, maybe high school experiences, not what it's all cracked up to be, but it is. And that actually does tie into player development and so many intangibles. Okay. You're a great soccer player. You're a great volleyball player. You need to learn what it's like to not be surrounded by D1 talents so that when you go to D1, it's a little bit easier for you to find your place, to fit in, and you'll look around and it's like, oh, this is even better. Or like, and I'm sure the first day of practice, you'll say like, wow, these girls are good, or these guys are good, but you will have been like, had a real formational experience by going through the high school athletic experience at your school. And again, I'm not talking about public versus private. You just don't need to leave or quit to be better. Like you can stay throughout and find out what that journey is, finish that journey, leave a legacy, and then best of luck in college.
3 thoughts to kind of build off of that. One of which, Paul McNeil's like one of the best examples here of all of this. He goes to a non-scholastic school out in California that's loaded with all of these players. And I think he told you when he came back to Richmond, he was like, something along the lines of like, they just had me standing in the corner as a 3-point shooter. Like, yeah, that's a great way to carve out a role. But, Paul gets to NC State, had to work through playing in a role at NC State, stayed loyal to the Wolfpack, even through a coaching change. And now Paul's kind of in that mix of like guys that Will Wade has at his disposal. And then you talk about the iron sharpening iron. Look what Isaiah Evans did to North Mecklenburg's basketball program. Mm-hmm. North Mech was that program that could never get over the hump, who was always elite. Mm-hmm. North Mech every year was the 4A favorite to win the basketball state championship every single year. And they couldn't break through and couldn't get to that point. And they kept hammering and hammering and hammering. And then finally they do it. The kid graduates, goes to Duke, and they win it again. Mm-hmm. Like, not only did the other guys in that program help sharpen Isaiah, he helped make them better. So when he moved on, they continued. Like, that is the ultimate legacy. And one of the million NBA podcasts that now exist, I saw one of them last night, though, that was talking about TJ McConnell in high school. TJ McConnell is now like the ultimate scrappy bench glue guy in the NBA. And they were talking about like growing up, TJ McConnell, I think it was, oh my gosh, like it's passing me. It was Ben Simmons and one other, Cam Johnson. He used to play at UNC. They were talking about it. They were like, TJ McConnell in high school was averaging 37 points a game and only shot threes. Mm-hmm. Now you like see him in the NBA and he's like this mid-range, like gonna pick you up full court, like hustle glue guy. And you look at it and you're like, you just got to get yourself to that level where you got to work yourself into the level. And once you get there, you figure out how you can fit there. But you have to have those tools and that ability to and those experiences under your belt. So when you do get to college, you can say, hey, I know how to be the guy, but like also I can step back and then kind of fit into my role here, and I can be that spot up shooter because I did shoot 12 threes a game in high school. Whereas if you spend your last couple of years of high school shooting 4 corner threes a game for your loaded high school team, and then you go to college and you're like, they need me to score 15 tonight. Well, I did that like 5 years ago when I was at my public high school.
Mhm.
I ain't had to do that in years. I gotta be that now.
Mhm.
So you're kind of limiting yourself, and you're kind of pulling yourself back a little bit, in my opinion. But yeah, it's a topic that it's a soapbox and a topic we could go on for quite some time. But we're gonna wrap up on that with the show. It's been interesting though. Like it's an interesting trend. I don't like where the trend's going, but
I don't like that
I think
it's leading into other sports. Like for the longest time, it was tennis was like the number one, and then it was then it was soccer, and now
it's
like
weird though because it's soccer, but like we actually saw soccer overcome it on the girls' side.
yeah, oh yeah, it was very different boys and girls. I've suggested to a lot of boys soccer players and stuff and coaches like, what if boys soccer was in the spring? Because clearly, like the months of the year are a conflict for the boys and there is no such conflict on the girls. Most of the top girls play, whether they're going to UNC or Duke or wherever. And they're like, I don't think it would change. At this point, it's so deep seated in boys soccer that they don't even think a calendar switch would change the top players, because it wasn't like that at the beginning of this decade for sure. Like there was a lot of D1 guys who played for their high school teams. So if you did like an all decade team in the 2010s, which I did back in 2019, it was almost all guys from the first part of that decade, not the last part, because that's where the talent was. But yeah, I don't like seeing it in other sports because this is where the legacy is made. But we need people to start to feel like the front of the jersey matters, and the school community matters. And I think there are some things that I think is honestly you could bring in coaching pay, and you can bring in like a lot of like educational policy into it of why high schools don't always feel that way now, but they always did back then. Get some people in the school that are super invested in that school. If, principals that don't leave after 2 years, assistant principals that aren't looking for the next leg up, coaches who aren't looking for the next gig, teachers who love that school and don't want to leave. And then you'll see athletes at that school that also don't want to leave, don't want to hang it up. It's not a foolproof plan, but it has something has to change because I don't like where this is going either.
Well, that'll wrap it up for tonight's episode of the High School OT Press Box. Lots of coverage coming out this week. Obviously, Monday being Labor Day, we'll have a lot of rankings across multiple sports, and then coverage throughout the week. More than likely Tuesday through Thursday, and then Friday we'll have football. And as I mentioned, Saturday I'm probably going to camp out at Green Level and catch some good volleyball. But we should have some stuff up on High School OT throughout the week, and then next Sunday have another episode of the Press Box for you. For Evan Moesta, Joel Bryant, and J. Mike Blake, enjoy the 4th week of the fall sport.